Django, Django.
Have you always been alone? Django, have you ever loved again?
I'm just gonna use like the Django intro for every one of our movie intros from now on.
Good. Maybe every deep dive should start with me humming the theme song.
Maybe every movie should start with the Django theme song.
Maybe, actually. One thing, again, I mentioned, by the way, this is the deep dive for Django, the original 1966 version. I only did the faintest cursory glance at Wikipedia, but apparently, like, this movie was such a phenomenon that a bunch of Italian spaghetti Western producers just started slapping the Django name on every Western they had.
There's literally dozens of Django movies out
right.
there.
And, like, I think, what's his butt? Like, the original actor only reprises a role once.
Yes, Franco Nero in, like, I think it was the 90s?
Something like that. Like, there's a sequel where he's, like, renounced violence and become a monk or some shit like that.
Yeah.
But, like, copyright law must have been different back then, where they were basically just like, oh, we've got a hit, just Django this, Django that, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of interesting that, like, maybe Tarantino was paying homage to that tradition by, like, naming his movie.
Yeah, that's
Django.
definitely an element of it, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Imagine if we were, like, living in this, like, renaissance of, like, fantasy movies, and there was some, like, really, really famous fantasy movie named, like, I don't know, like The Black Castle.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly every producer was just like, The Black Castle this, The Black Castle that.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, you couldn't sue them because it was different. By the way, The Black Castle is mine, okay? I'm stealing it. I'm going to use it someday.
Fair enough. Where do you want to get started with this? Should I give maybe one of the bigger...
I think we need to talk about the lady, Maria.
Okay. So, but here's where I want to almost start with this, is like my comparison to Django Unchained. So I think that Maria's the weakest part of the entire movie. I think that she's way undercooked, and she could have used a little bit more dialogue or character growth.
I just want to point out that, like, I haven't seen Django in probably actually 10 years now that I think about it.
Yep.
But I still remember Broomhilda's name.
Yeah.
I saw this movie this afternoon, and I couldn't remember Maria's name.
So I think that the way that Tarantino actually improved upon this movie is, I actually think Django and Django Unchained is an amalgamation of Django and Maria.
Okay.
So Django is, you know, the badass, like, cowboy that we follow throughout the Django Unchained movie, but he's also the character who begins as a slave. He's, like, you know, like, Maria's in the brothel, and she at some point leaves to join the Mexicans, who don't treat her well either.
You know, this whole town is being besieged by these two rival factions.
Right.
And both of them treat her like shit.
Yeah, and Django gives her the opportunity in a way to have her vengeance, although the movie doesn't really give her that at all. And I think that that's where Tarantino actually improves upon this story quite a bit, is he actually gives the Django character a satisfying revenge arc to it.
I never really put that together. Also, Maria's supposed to be mixed race, right?
Yes.
So that adds an element to, like, why she's treated so badly, unfortunately. Right. Also, going into, like, the 2012 Django movie, like, at no point in that movie did I ever question their relationship. Right?
Yep.
Even though they don't share that much screen time, you do buy it.
Yes.
There's a moment between Django and Maria where he goes into her room and he's just like, he's just like, I'm here for a blanket. And he says it with that usual, like, gravelly, tough guy macho way. So we're like, dude, just take the fucking blanket. Like, and then she has this line where she's just like, thank you. And he's like, for what? She's like, for what you did for me. And he's like, well, I didn't really do it for you. And then she's like, all the same, it's, you know, for the first time in my life, I feel like a real woman. And he's like, I'm glad you feel like a real woman. And then he, like, shuts the door, drops the blanket, and, like, it's implied that they had knowledge of each other in a biblical way. But I was watching that scene just like, huh, all right.
Right.
And then there's another scene later on where Maria's like, I want to come with you, and, like, you know, we can start a new life somewhere, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just kind of like, ugh.
What's your name again?
Kind of, right?
Well, and again, I think if this movie got remade, I think these two characters could have, like, a growing, like, an organic, like, growing together kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas this movie has no interest in these two characters ever, like, forming really any sort of a deeper bond.
So I mentioned in last week's episode that Django does have a very, very slight character arc, right?
Yes.
So in that sense, and I actually like that it's kind of vague and it's not even really...
Loved it.
I was thinking, like, if this movie was made nowadays, there'd be so like just taking a step back, Django's whole like Batman dead parents origin story. I did it. I brought Batman into it. Last week you said I wouldn't be able to, but here I am.
That's hilarious.
So Django's tragic backstory is that his wife, Mercedes something, was killed by the Major, right?
Yes.
And he's come to town seeking vengeance. More on that later.
Yeah.
And then the theme song does a great job where it's like, it just very obliquely is like, oh, you lost her. Oh, you lost her. Oh, will you ever love again?
Yeah.
And then towards the end, like near the end of the second act, Maria is going off about how they can start a new life somewhere else. And he's just kind of like, it's almost kind of like he's trying to let her down gently, but he's basically just kind of like, I can't love like that again, right?
Right.
It's sort of this idea that, like, you know, I loved my wife, Mercedes, but I'll never love like that again, right?
Yep.
But then some crazy shit happens, and then he kind of decides that he's going to wreak vengeance upon his wife. And, like, my interpretation was that, like, because he shared this experience with Maria and they both almost died, and he finally got vengeance, that, like, he's now going off to be with Maria. So what I thought his character arc was kind of like, and it's a kind of a very simple but very compelling character arc that you see in a lot of fiction. It's like this macho tough guy learning to open himself up again.
Yep.
And like that is a compelling enough character arc to carry a movie, but in that sense, Maria is only kind of an ornament.
Yes.
She's ornamental.
At most.
Right. Like she's only there to facilitate his character arc.
Yeah.
And you know what? As someone who writes themselves, like, your main character is your main character.
Yep.
And sometimes other characters are just there to service the main character, but you still need to give them enough depth and complexity that they don't just feel ornamental.
Yeah.
And that's Maria's biggest problem, is she's an ornament.
Yes.
Can I say ornamental one more time?
Yeah.
Perhaps I can.
I very much agree. And, like, you know, when he's escaping from the Mexican revolutionaries, I had kind of forgotten about her, and then she shows up again, and I was like, oh yeah, Maria, of course. Like, obviously, like, this is why he turned her down, because I was like, oh, that's weird that he doesn't want to celebrate the gold with her or whatever, but it comes back around eventually. But if she didn't show up in that moment, if she didn't have the idea to go and check the barn where the horses were, then he would have just left without her and not thought about her again.
She does kind of help him escape, I guess. So there is that. And, like, you know, to Django's credit, you can kind of understand why she would maybe fall in love with him, because he seems like the only person who actually treats her like a person.
And that's kind of like Django in a nutshell, too. Like, and that's kind of maybe some of the bigger themes of the movie, right? Like, Django is the outsider coming into town. He's wearing the Union colors. So automatically, like, and this is kind of also Sergio, like, maybe putting a little bit of his politics into the movie. Like, he was a left-leaning guy, and, like, this is a movie where our main character is a Union character, and he's fighting the main villain, who is the KKK. Like, literally.
Yeah, essentially.
That's something that I actually really liked, especially when we get into the bar scene. Like, the first showdown between him and Major Jackson, I can tell in that moment that Django is a character that cares about other people. It doesn't really matter what other walk of life that character comes from. It's like, do no harm to me and I won't do any harm onto you. And, like, also I treat you as an equal kind of thing, right?
Well,
whereas
it's funny, not to cut you off, but there is a scene where he's showing off his, like, basically his machine gun, his turret, essentially.
Yeah.
And he's just like, hey, like, Nathaniel, duck. And he just shoots all of those bottles up there.
Right.
So there's stuff where I'm like, all right, he's a bit rude. Like, you know, he didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But hey.
Sometimes you got to be a salesman too, right?
I guess, right? I guess, like, a worse person would have just shot Nathaniel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Major Jackson.
Pretty much. I didn't really care for Major Jackson as a villain.
Yeah, and I very much disagree with you. So let's hear it.
All right.
Put it out there.
So my whole thing, and I feel like I've talked about this before in other movies, but, like, so when Major Jackson first confronts Django in the tavern, he's got, like, 5 dudes with him.
Right.
And we've just seen him, like basically doing something horrible where he's basically just, like, releasing prisoners and then shooting them as they try to run away.
Yeah, they're using them as target practice.
Essentially, right? So, which is awful, obviously. And then he shows up and confronts Django, And then Django very calmly just shoots all 5 of his men.
Right.
Even to the point where like he looks, without even looking behind him, he shoots a guy.
Yeah.
Like behind the bar. And then him and Jackson confront each other, and he basically just tells Jackson to like fuck off.
Right. And bring all of his men. He's like, bring all your men here because I want a fair fight.
Essentially, right? So like, to me, that kind of lessened Jackson's credibility as a villain because we just saw him get trounced by Django.
In a way, yes, but so here's why I like Major Jackson. I think Major Jackson is like, I think you put this really well in the primer episode where he's like this imposing figure. He just has that look about him that's like, I want to cross the street when this guy is on his way towards me.
Pretty much.
And I think that's really effective. I could see this character, like there's something like typically handsome about this guy, and like he has like this bit of charisma about him that I could see why people would follow him, but he also is a bit of a grimy, wormy, like self-preservation dirtbag, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Like I don't think he cares about his men at all. Like he goes and gets all of his men, and then as soon as he knows that he's been beat by Django, he doesn't charge Django with the machine gun. He turns and runs away.
There's that great moment, too, where Django basically shoots his horse dead from beneath him, and then he flops into the ground and gets all muddy and then has to scramble away.
Yep.
And I get that, like, this isn't Dragon Ball Z, and I'm not expecting them to, like, throw their shirts off and, like, fly into the sky and start punching each other through mountains. But I'm like, why should I be intimidated by this guy? Like,
and I think that's also, like, actually kind of reflective in Tarantino's movie, too, that the KKK are a bunch of like goobers. They're a bunch of
goobers,
right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of like the fact that like Major Jackson is like this suave tough guy right up until he's not, and then it keeps happening that he's just like, I guess, kind of a loser.
You know, counterpoint. Like, you know, you're right. The KKK are fucking idiots with Jonah Hill.
Yeah.
In the 2012 version, but then we've also got Calvin Candy, who is a credible threat.
Right. Yes.
And also Samuel L. Jackson's character. I forget what his name is.
Yeah.
I guess it's just every time Jackson shows up, he gets humiliated.
Yeah.
And like, this is a wild tangent, but like, I've often noticed that with Stephen King's villains where like, they're almost kind of like, there's something just kind of pathetic about all his villains. Like, Randall Flagg, Pennywise, like, I could go on. There's something slightly pathetic about all of them.
Yep.
And you could slightly chalk that up to Stephen King's problem with climaxes, but you could also maybe chalk it up to just his personal philosophy on like, yeah, I mean, when you think about it, the most violent, most destructive people aren't usually suave, cunning men. They're fucking idiots.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a really apt topical comparison I'm not going to make.
Horse in a hospital.
Horse in a hospital. The Joker, for instance.
Yes.
There, I brought Batman into it again.
Oh my God.
But I guess just my other problem, too, is like Jackson walks into a bar with 5 men. Django shoots them all. He leaves. Comes back with like all 40 of his men. Django mows them all down with his machine gun.
Which is such a great turn. We got to talk about that after.
Yeah, we do, right? Then he runs off. And then he almost kind of like vanishes from the movie for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then when Django meets up with, you know, the Mexican revolutionary, he basically convinces them to help him storm this fortress so that they can get all this gold. And he has some line about it. He's like, well, that's why I let Jackson live so that he could run back to the fortress and blah, blah, blah. And like, you know, keep in mind, I only saw this movie today, but like as a writer, part of me was like, I don't know that train of logic.
So I kept wondering about it too, right? Because I was like, why does he keep leaving Jackson alive? Like, why is he toying with this guy so much, right? Like, whereas we are supposed to think that maybe Jackson is somewhat of a credible threat. And I kind of realized it was kind of the moment where the revolutionaries are leaving the town, right? And they're kind of storming off all happy. And then at that moment, I was like, oh, I see why Django left them together, because Django wants these two baddies to be like playing off each other, right? Like it's such an easy way to distract from Django. And also at the end of the day, like if you make two of your enemies fight, you by like association are better off in that battle afterwards.
Well,
right?
And to Jackson's credit, the one time he doesn't get humiliated is when he kills the Mexican revolutionary.
Right.
Like his biggest rival.
Yeah.
But my other big problem with Jackson is that Django apparently has a personal vendetta against the man because he killed his wife, Mercedes. And this isn't really Jackson's fault. This actually might be my main gripe with the movie is that Django is ostensibly out for blood, but like he treats avenging his wife the way you treat like a task on your to-do list, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm going to get all this gold, and then at some point I have to kill the guy who shot my wife, right? Like,
yeah, I do agree with that like there's a little bit of side questing here.
Yeah, and like, you know, he seems more interested in making off with all this gold than he does in avenging his wife Mercedes. By the way, like as an aside, Django, what did you think was going to happen when you married a woman named after a car? Right? Of course she got shot.
Oh, jeez.
But yeah, I guess that was kind of my big problem with Jackson. It's like bringing Batman back into it. Imagine if Batman just didn't.
Now you're just doing it to like.
I'm doing it out of spite. Yeah. Imagine if like Batman's like, oh, I gotta, you know, do this, this, and this, and then at some point I have to capture the Joker. Right. That's just kind of how it felt to me.
But that is kind of also how it works a little bit. Like sometimes you got to go side questing.
I guess, right?
But like, yes, he does. He plays with his food for maybe a little longer than typically.
And you know what?
Expect.
If it was kind of like the 2004 Tom Jane Punisher, where like it's very clear that he's trying to like break this guy before he kills him, I'd be like, all right, fine. But this seems more like he's like, I just want all that Confederate gold.
There's an element of humiliation. I think that he is humiliating Jackson time and time and time again.
But like even so the movie ends with a big showdown between Jackson and Django, but like it almost feels kind of accidental on Django's part. Like I don't think he was positioning himself so that he could get revenge on this guy. It's more just like my hands are broken and Jackson's on his way. I guess I got to go shoot him, right?
Yeah, I agree. I do feel like it kind of has to swing back into that.
I guess
now insider baseball a little bit.
Okay.
This movie was essentially written in reverse. Like they knew how they wanted to end this movie and then kind of like wrote it backwards, which you don't hear very often. Like they had the visual of like the showdown with Jackson. Although
I will admit, not to cut you off.
Yeah.
The whole idea of Django with his hands broken, like propping himself up on his dead wife's tombstone as the man who killed her like approaches him.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Like absolute cinema.
Like
right?
I said, the third act of this movie is flawless in my opinion. Like the last 10 minutes in the cemetery are amazing. Like the shootout and everything, and then he gets up and leaves the gun on her grave and like stumbles away.
That final shot is incredible.
Beautiful.
Right?
Beautiful.
This isn't really a fault of the character, just from a screenwriting perspective. Like I've never seen a movie where the main villain killed the hero's wife at some point in the past, and the hero seems like curiously unconcerned. You know, he's just kind of like, yeah, I'll kill that guy eventually. You know? Maybe that's me being a little uncharitable, but like it was weird though, right?
I guess minorly, but I also just was having so much fun that wasn't a thing that stuck out to me.
No, but I think like this might have been a 9 movie for me if that had been a little more focused. As a result, it's only a 7 movie. Okay. Now, I still enjoyed it quite a lot, and I'm glad I saw it. Yeah. But I was just a little... my writer brain was a little like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
like, you know?
So I kind of interpreted the ending of the movie a little bit different. Like, I kind of interpreted the end of the movie, like, there's a cost to this vengeance, and at the end of the day, like, you know, Django walks away penniless with broken hands, and I don't actually know that he goes back to Maria at the end.
Well, we don't even know that she survives.
Yes.
Like, he tells Nathaniel, he's like, if you pull the bullet out, she'll probably live.
Yeah.
But then Nathaniel gets shot.
Right.
So she might have just been bleeding out.
Exactly, right? So, like, I actually don't think this is a very happy ending, despite, like, how epic it is. You know, I don't know that Django necessarily gets the redemption that he was looking for, but it also is just really exciting and cinematic, and I think it's almost like similar to the other guys. Boom, there, I did it. Guys.
All right, you did it. Congratulations.
Where, you know, the ending feels really triumphant, but I don't actually know that it's a good, all the characters end up in a good place.
Do you mean the nice guys?
The nice guys, yes, not the other guys.
Right. Slightly similar, but very different.
Yes,
yeah.
There's a lot of guys.
There's a lot of guy movies. But, yeah, so that was kind of my big gripe with this movie. I did like how the plot unfolded, how Django, again, just passingly references, I have business in that town. Mm-hmm. It was kind of funny. When Jackson first walks into the bar to confront Django, I was a little like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I wouldn't expect.
Right, so early.
Yeah, right. And then Django pulls his machine gun or his turret out of his coffin.
Which is amazing. It's so unexpected.
Right. Yeah. And you're just like, I'm just like, okay. And then he runs off. And it was funny. I looked at the time. That was all in the first half hour. I'm like,
yeah.
Well, what are we supposed to do for the next hour?
Right.
And then it's funny. Django meets up with his Mexican revolutionary buddy, and he tells him about this Confederate gold that he wants to steal. So I was kind of like, oh, okay, that's going to be the rest of the movie, is stealing this Confederate gold. And then, boom, next scene, they stealing the gold. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
And then I'm just, so I liked how I couldn't really tell what was going to happen next.
Yeah, no, I was in the exact same boat. Like, I was kind of along for the ride, and like there was so many twists and turns to this story, and you kind of knew inevitably, especially as like things played out and you started to learn like, oh, as they're burying all of the people, Django has somebody who's in this grave who he cares about, right?
Right. Right. Mercedes.
Yeah.
So
there's kind of like this unexpectedness to it, and there's some like really big bombastic scenes that we get to experience, like the Trojan horse. Get it?
I got it. Sorry. That was pretty cool.
There's so many like honestly things that I haven't seen before, like seen kind of done quite like this movie does, and they all feel like very unexpected, but also like they don't feel like they come out of left field entirely, right?
Well, I think the scene that really got me the most, aside from, I actually do kind of feel like the scene where he opens the coffin. I was actually telling you before we started recording, like as soon as we saw him with the coffin, I'm like, oh well, he's gonna open it at the end of the movie, and it's gonna be, I don't know, something is gonna be in there, right?
Right.
But then he opens it at the end of Act 1, and it's a turret, and he just mows down like 48 dudes.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, fuck, it's a gun. Like, what else would be in there?
Yeah.
By the way, that scene by itself kind of sells me on the movie.
Yes.
Like, that elevates it to a 7 for me.
Yep.
But then the other scene that really got my goat was when him and Maria approach the bridge, and he basically says something to the effect of, like, I finally have to cross this bridge. And
yes.
Like, you know, blah, 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 blah. But then this coffin, which is now stuffed with gold, just flops into the quicksand and sinks.
Yeah.
And there was something very kind of poetic and humiliating about the fact that, like, all his ill-gotten gains are now gone.
Yeah, and like him side questing, like there's kind of a, you got caught side questing and now you got to pay the price.
Kind of. It's also the fact that this coffin that he's been dragging around finally, you know, is gone, which kind of, to me, symbolized like, okay, he's ready to let go of his wife.
Right.
Finally.
Yep.
But then the revolutionaries catch up with him and beat the living fuck out of him and break his hands.
I love the character of the general, like the Hugo. Like, I love how him and Django are friends, but he also, like, you know, he's a man in charge, and he also is like, you know, Django, you've committed a crime against us, and so what we're going to do to you is completely destroy your hands.
He has that line where he's like, well, we don't execute thieves, but we'll make sure you can't use your hands ever again.
Yeah.
And I really liked that, partly just for the sheer unexpected barbarity of it.
Yes.
I can see how this would have been really, really upsetting in 1966, because, like, even in 2025, I'm like...
It's shocking.
I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
I also particularly liked it in that I think part of the reason I had a hard time taking Jackson seriously is because Django himself is so OP. There's that scene where Jackson confronts him and he just shoots 5 guys.
Right.
Without even really blinking.
Yep.
Then there's the next scene where he mows 48 guys down with his turret, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, at no point does Django ever seem too genuinely threatened by what's going on.
Yeah.
But then having his hands broken, I was like, whoa, like, holy shit.
It's such a turn. Like, you're exactly right. Like, he kind of is
he's like an invincible male power fantasy.
Yeah.
Until he's not.
Yeah. And it just is such a shock factor too, because he's kind of like the stand-in for Clint Eastwood in all of his movies, right? And like, you would never see Clint Eastwood's character get like mauled like this.
Well, it's funny. Like, I think one of my few complaints about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is that Clint Eastwood never, except for that one point, he never really seems too threatened by what's going on.
Right.
With this, though, it's like, oh, like, his fucking hands are broken.
Yeah.
And then when he's confronting those guys at the cemetery, I was actually genuinely on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, so was I. I had no idea how this movie was going to end.
It's funny, like, I actually looked at the runtime, and I looked at the screen, and looked at the runtime, and I looked at the screen, and I actually was like, is this movie going to end with him getting shot? Like,
yeah.
Because what is he going to do, right?
It was such a possibility.
Yeah. So
this movie made me believe in a character, my hero, being killed in the final act.
Being mowed down in the final act, right?
Yeah. How hard is that to do these days, right?
Pretty fucking hard. But then, he props up the gun on his wife's tombstone, and he ends up just mowing them down.
Right, but even that, he's failing at it, right?
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
is he going to be able to figure this out in time?
It's so tense where, he's propped this pistol up on his wife's tombstone, and you see him, like struggling to load the gun with his fucking teeth.
Yeah.
It's just like, holy fucking...
It's desperate.
Yeah.
It's so desperate. And that's when the stakes really reach their highest, which is kind of the perfect time where you want your stakes to reach their highest point.
I just thought it was so cool that, you took, again, your kind of ultimate male power fantasy gunslinger hero, and then you brought him so low.
Yes.
To the point where you're like, I don't know he's going to make it.
I very much agree. And that's why I think that the last act of this movie, from his escape onwards, is perfect.
Yeah, I would agree, right?
And that's maybe where I'm quite a bit higher on this movie, is because I started very high in this movie. I was like, oh, this is really visually appealing to me. And then the score kind of hits, right? Then this movie, the last act, literally just kind of perfectly kind of does well, there it is, ta-da. And I kind of, the opener and the end just completely sold me. And there was definitely some stuff in the middle that I was like, this didn't work and this isn't perfect. But the high at the beginning and the high at the end kind of just made it so that I didn't care.
Yeah, the opening shot and the closing shot are particularly beautiful, especially the tombstone with the gun left on it kind of take up the foreground, and we see Django walking in the background. I personally really like when the bad guy dies and it's just, the movie's just all right, movie's over.
Yeah.
Again,
we don't have to get 20 minutes of him and Maria talking afterwards. No, it just ends.
It's movie's over. A piece of writing advice I got a long time ago was once the main conflict is resolved, don't linger. Just get the fuck out of there.
Yeah. Agree.
It must remind me of Jaws, how the shark blows up and they're just all right, credits.
Yeah.
Shark's dead. What do you want? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's perfect cinema. Absolute cinema for me.
Absolute cinema. And again, I liked this movie quite a bit. I think it was just Django and his relationship with the villain just felt a little murky to me. It didn't quite work for me.
Yeah, that's fair. I think
I agree with you, though. I liked Hugo quite a bit. He was almost kind of like Lando Calrissian without the character development.
Yeah.
I particularly enjoyed that scene where he's kind of just look, I want my gold and I'm skipping town.
Yep.
And he's just what? Come on, stay on, be an officer. And he's like, hey, man, you got enough officers. He's like, all right, come on. And he takes him in a stable and they pour all the gold out on the ground. He's like, look, all the gold's here so you can rest easy.
Right.
You don't even need to worry about it, dog.
Yep.
It's compelling how you're just kind of oh, yeah, no, he maintains that kind of affable, avuncular attitude, but you're just oh, no, you're...
I can't trust this guy anymore.
Yeah, no, you're in danger. You need to get the fuck out of there.
Yes.
So...
Yeah, and the way that Django gets out of there is also really solid. I love this movie too because, again, it keeps me on my toes. When Django starts to plot his escape, I'm why did he bring this woman up here instead of Maria? Why didn't they kind of try to ride off into the
That was clever,
together?
Right?
And he uses her distraction. So I don't know, that whole sequence I thought was really strong as well.
I did also like the scene where he's trying to escape but also dragging his fucking coffin with him. And there's a point where he uses the coffin as a platform to close the distance between two buildings and then drags it behind him. I'm that's something out of a video game.
Yeah. Well, I love that the coffin is kind of ever present in the movie, right? It kind of, there's sequences without it, but it is really actually something that's important to the plot.
It really is a metaphor, a really profound metaphor for grief.
Yeah.
How he's just dragging this fucking coffin behind him. And that's why, again, when it slips into the quicksand, I'm oh, okay, nice.
Mm-hmm. So if I had to name a favorite scene in the movie, my favorite scene is the crossroads at the bridge. I think that's It's so compelling. Like, it's kind of like that one moment where, you feel like things are maybe going to have a happy ending, and then just the pure shock value of it. That's easily my favorite scene of the movie. Again, the end of this movie is perfection, though. After that, like, everything after that moment is incredible. We haven't talked about Brother Jonathan showing up and getting his ear chopped off.
It's funny, like thinking about all these things out loud, you do kind of understand why this would have been so shocking in 1966. I mean, it's a little cheesy now when they rip his ear off because like his head is positioned in such a way that like
that's like the only shot of the entire movie that I was like, ooh, I wish you'd filmed that.
Done that a little better,
yeah.
Like use some makeup. But then when they then stick it in his mouth, I was like, all right, that's a little fucked up. Yeah, like, that's unnecessary. Yeah, and then they just shoot him, and it's like, all right.
Apparently, so the producer said that Sergio was asked to remove that shot, and he forgot.
Perfect.
Yeah, the Italian like film board or whatever was like, please remove that. That's horrifying.
And he was like, okay, wink. I'll take it out.
Oh, so great. The final body count of the movie? How many people do you think died in this movie?
I'm gonna say like 100.
180.
Ooh.
We're up there with John Wick movies.
Wow, that is high.
Nero kills... Sorry, not Franco Nero, but Django kills 79 people himself.
Wow.
Yes.
I will say there were a lot of scenes where he's like using his machine, like his turret.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of like actors very flamboyantly hurling themselves against the ground. But
so fun.
Yeah, we're just like, ah! That must have been a fun day on set where they're like, and 1, 2, 3, you're all dead. And
into the
like,
mud. Oh, so good. Anything else you want to talk about plot-wise?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think we both had a problem with Maria.
Yeah.
I personally had a problem with Jackson as a villain. Not even really a problem. I just thought he could have been a stronger antagonist.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know?
I liked him quite a bit, but I agree to disagree, I guess.
I feel just the character could have been better utilized.
Yeah, fair enough.
But it's more of a scripting problem.
Yeah, where I no notes. I quite enjoyed Jackson. Sequels, prequels, reboots. The reason why we're actually doing this is because this is an unofficial adaptation of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo.
Yojimbo, which a few dollars more, or no, a fistful of dollars by the other Sergio.
Yes.
Sergio Leone is also considered a adaptation.
Yes, and that came out actually before this movie did, and this movie was somewhat of a response to it. And funny enough, like, it sounded like Sergio Leone and Sergio
Sergio 2.
Yes, the other Sergio were actually good friends.
Kind of funny.
And so they kind of, obviously had this competition between A Fistful of Dollars and Django. And I think A Fistful of Dollars, maybe because of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, has become more iconic. And also probably because of Clint Eastwood, right?
Of course.
Honestly, like, I really enjoyed this movie quite a bit. It's
I
funny
did too.
It's funny that this movie has like 30 unofficial sequels plus like.
Hey, that's when you know you've made it. When everybody's stealing from you.
Oh yeah. It's kind of like, this movie is kind of, again, I'm gonna make the comparison one last time. This movie, I would say, is very comparable to John Wick 1.
Okay.
Where it kind of is doing its thing, and there's a lot of shocking things that happen, and it's like, it's designed to this world that I find very compelling. It's shot beautifully. It's not a perfect movie. I don't think John Wick 1 is a perfect movie by any means, but I have an absolute blast every time I watch it.
It's a banger.
Yeah.
It is a banger.
Yeah. The official remake, if you wanted to go and find it, is called Django Strikes Again, and it was made in 1987.
Right, and that's where he's older. And
yeah.
I did want to point out, what's his butt?
Franco Nero.
Franco Nero was 23 during this movie.
Yeah, he doesn't look it, and they did a really good job of like actually making him look more grizzled.
I saw that like they actually gave him fake wrinkles.
Yeah.
A lot of the times effects from back then look kind of quaint, but like I was looking at like the lines around his eyes, and I'm like, no, I thought he was like older than us.
Yeah.
So like they did a good job.
Yeah, I very much agree. So yeah, and then they're in talks of making a third official sequel to this. It was kind of happening in like the mid to late 2010s, and then COVID happened, and I think that kind of kiboshed it.
What's his butt? Franco Nero is like 83 or something.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. Like
it might be dead.
Yeah. And like, you know what? He looks pretty good for 83, but like seeing that guy running around mowing people down, it probably wouldn't look great.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's probably kind of past that point. Like, and honestly, oh god, what's the movie Clint Eastwood's like final Western movie? His big kind of like
Unforgiven.
Yeah, Unforgiven. Like I feel like Unforgiven's kind of just out there already.
Yeah.
And the third Django movie would basically just be Unforgiven.
It would just be Unforgiven, but like 35 years later.
Yeah, like he just way older Unforgiven.
Yeah, it's just like Unforgiven. No, it should just
There's evil.
Well, yeah, it should just be called Unforgiven, and then in brackets again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Effects and filming. So Corbucci watched a bunch of newsreel footage of the KKK to kind of get inspiration and write scenes that kind of felt in line with what the KKK would be like.
Yeah.
Again, I thought they did a really good job. I think I like the red hoods and everything. Like there's a menace to it, but also like it did make me kind of chuckle and think back to Django Unchained when you do just remember that they're a bunch of goobers.
They're having an argument about and they can't see out of their eyes.
Yeah.
And the one guy gets offended and storms off.
Yeah.
And like that's easily the funniest scene in that movie, right?
Yeah. It just kind of reminds you that like these guys are idiots.
Well, I mean, all white supremacists are fucking idiots when
Yeah.
you get right down to it.
Yeah, exactly. That was not Franco Nero's voice. They did dub it. They wanted like a more grizzled voice.
I guess he was 23,
Yeah,
right?
he was only
Like,
23.
He'd have to talk like this. Like Batman. Oh.
Jesus. They at first thought this was going to be a problem. They had like some bad weather the whole time they were making this movie. Like the whole time it was really dark and cloudy and gray. But it actually kind of, the way that they ended up shooting it actually worked out in their favor. Like this movie is iconically beautiful.
I know, right? For such an ugly, squalid little place.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of movies try to kind of almost do something similar with the aesthetic, and oftentimes it just comes off drab, whereas like there's something, like you said, really apocalyptic about this film.
Yeah.
They shot this mostly in Italy and Rome. Like the town that they shot in was like an actual studio called Elio Studios. But at that point in time, the Western genre was relatively old, and so they'd been shooting movies there for years, and basically the whole town was decrepit anyway at that point.
It's kind of interesting to note just how many Westerns were pumped out in this period of time.
Yeah.
Just a glut of Western movies. Like, they must have been talking about Western movies the way we're not talking about superhero movies.
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
That's so comparable.
Yeah.
And I would say like Western movies or superhero movies actually have quite a bit of nods to the Western genre. And I mean, like the obvious one is Logan, right? Which is just out and out of
Which
Western.
is a Western.
Yeah.
Yeah. They are both very quintessentially American genres.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the spaghetti Western element of these movies works relatively
That's true.
well too.
That is
so
true.
The Italian sensibilities somehow work. I guess at the end of the movie, Corbucci told Nero to drag the coffin up a hill for one last shot without turning around. And by the time he got up the hill, everybody had packed up and left, and they just were playing a really great prank on him.
That is pretty funny, actually.
Apparently there was like this like black humor that was just like throughout the whole filming of the movie.
Maybe it's an Italian thing.
Yeah.
That actually is really funny. Like, all right, last shot, drag it up the hill.
Yeah.
And then they just fucking left him there.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, come on, guys.
Score of the movie absolutely rocks.
Oh, yeah.
Like, not only just like the opening song, which has been stuck in my head for almost a week now, but some of the riffs in this movie are incredible. Like, I don't know. I hope you noticed them.
I actually did. I remember there was one like kind of sting when something horrible happened where I'm just like, wow, like ding, 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 ding. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's like different guitar styles. Like, there was a point in time when so I'll kind of get ahead here a little bit, like personal views, partner factor, but Justin watched this movie entirely with me because the first two acts I think were just not quite her taste, and I think if she should have stuck around for the third act, because the third act was incredible and kind of redeems the whole movie. Like, she was laying in bed going to sleep, and she was like, oh man, this score really rocks, and I was like, oh, it's so good. There was a point in time when I was getting Lord of the Rings vibes. Like, there's one riff where I was like, I can't put my finger on which Lord of the Rings song this is.
Are we in Middle Earth right now?
Yeah. There's some really great guitar riffs and orchestras in this movie. If I had to sell you on one thing alone in this movie, honestly, that's like debatably the thing I would sell you on is the score of this movie.
The score is like, I'm actually glad that Tarantino decided to pay it forward in his version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like, perfect. It got scored by Luis Baklavov. He also scored the Gospel According to St. Matthew.
Huh.
So there's another Jesus movie.
Okay. Wow. It all comes back to either Batman or Jesus.
I think he won an award for that too. He didn't win an award
have.
for this, but he should have won an award for this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So this is, again, one of my favorite music scores of this year. Really, really enjoyed it quite a bit. Look back at times. Apparently using Mexican prisoners as target practice was actually something that happened semi-frequently. Like in Brazil, they used to do that to the indigenous people up until like the 1950s.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's not even that long ago.
No. Like that was 15 years after this movie
Yikes.
came out, or 15 years before this movie came out. So yeah, there's definitely some historic relevancy to some of this stuff. And it actually, when it came out, had a lot of negative pushback, and almost entirely because of how violent it was, which is kind of funny.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it is quite violent. I will, even by modern standards, it's quite violent.
Yeah, you know what it's kind of like? It's kind of like The Thing, and when The Thing came out, it was just like the wrong time for people to get into like this dark, like very cynical,
grimy
movie.
Shit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if this movie was released today, and again, it fixed some of the issues you and I had, that this movie would actually like do really well.
No, I agree.
The last thing I want to mention before we move on is the character Django is actually based on a real life character named Django Reinhardt, who was a jazz guitarist.
Right, and he had 2 paralyzed fingers on his one hand, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So at the time, apparently he was a very, very famous jazz musician, and so people would have known that like that's what they were referring to when his hands got all busted up.
Okay.
Apparently it was kind of like a black joke that the director thought of when they
very Italian sense of humor. Yeah.
Yeah. So the legacy of this movie was released in Japan under the title Continuation Wilderness Bodyguard.
That's a terrible title.
And they actually presented it as a remake of Yojimbo and a sequel to A Fistful of Dollars. So according to the Japanese, this is a sequel to A Fistful of Dollars.
Okay.
I've never actually seen A Fistful of Dollars.
I only saw it in passing like a long time ago, but like they're similar enough that like, no, that doesn't work, right?
I'd like to watch A Fistful of Dollars.
Oh, we definitely should.
Yeah.
But just like, yeah, that is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Just like, it's a remake and a sequel. You're like, oh, what else is it? It's also a cookbook.
So Kurosawa actually was the guy who kind of spearheaded distributing it in Japan. So it's kind of cool that it came back around like that.
I guess that's pretty cool of him too, that he was just like, oh, these weirdos remade my movie and I like it, so I'm gonna help them out, right? Yeah. That's actually pretty cool. Yeah. You could easily see him being like a dirtbag about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And the English dub version of this movie is actually frequently criticized for being really poorly written, and that you should actually go and try to find the Italian version.
So if anyone knows where we can find the Italian version, I would really like to see it.
I also really want to watch it. Like I paid the $3 or $4 to buy this movie on Apple, and before we recorded today, I did take a quick peek to see if I also had the Italian dialogue, and I don't have that option on there. So if there's a version I can buy somewhere to get that Italian dialogue, like I'd probably go out of my way to buy it.
I probably would too, actually.
So personal reviews and the partner factor, like I thought this movie was great, and I've been thinking about it for almost a week now since I watched it, and I really, really want to rewatch it because there's some elements of this movie that are freaking good.
It is a good movie.
I'll say that like this isn't more than like an 8.5 out of 10 for me, but that's just because it has some flaws that unfortunately are flaws of the 60s that, like, you know, there's some elements that don't hold up. But otherwise, like, I had a really, really good time with this movie.
I think it's interesting that it seems like your biggest gripe was the character of Maria.
Yeah.
My biggest gripe was actually, what's his butt? Django's.
Major Jackson.
His motivation. Well, his motivation in regards to Major Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting that we both kind of came away with different problems, but we both still had a good time.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, you're an 8, I'm a 7. So, like, we both still enjoyed it quite a bit.
Oh, definitely.
I probably will see it again.
Yeah. I think that's a mark of a good movie, right? Like, we've definitely watched movies where I'm like, and I'm never gonna think about that movie.
I think the most
afterwards.
egregious example is probably
Aguirre.
no. Well, yeah, that one too. But also,
I watched Aguirre last week again.
Oh yeah, good for you. Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember a goddamn thing about that movie.
I could describe some elements of it, but that movie does just straight up I don't think holds up very well.
No.
And maybe it would be better like on the big screen, but I don't know, like this movie was really fun and that movie wasn't quite as fun.
It's also like the length factor, right?
Yes.
Like you could watch this whole movie. Lawrence of Arabia is almost like 3 hours.
It is 3 hours, I think.
Yeah, so like you could watch this movie twice.
Yeah.
In the time it would take you to watch.
And I would have twice as much fun.
Exactly. Small things come in small packages. Or great things come in small packages. Am I right, fellas? And with that.
Jess thought it was fine, but then she had to go to bed because she had to work the next day. But again, from the bedroom, she was like, oh man, this score is so good. And I very much agreed.
Yeah.
I'm really glad we did this one. I was pleasantly surprised. I wasn't sure what I was expecting going in with this one, but again, this is one of my favorite movies that we've done on the podcast this year.
Really?
Actually.
Yeah, actually, I would agree. I feel like I haven't personally resonated with a lot of the movies we've done this year, but this one might actually take home the gold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So far,
so
really,
far.
really like this one quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
More than I was expecting.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
So
actually, of all the movies we've done this year, I think this was the one that I had the fewest gripes with.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. I mean, again, the only gripe that I had was just really a product of its time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but man, if somebody wants to remake this, like, and not do Django Unchained, but like actually remake this movie and buff up some of the parts that are imperfect, like, I think there's something here.
If there's any studios that want to pay me to rewrite the dialogue, I will do it.
Yeah, and Maria's character, please.
Yeah, her too. And Major Jackson.
No, keep it. Well, you need like a guy who plays the same. He's got the same, I don't know, gravitas. to him.
Gravitas. Imposing regal structure.
Sure. We'll go with that. I have no idea what we're doing next, so I am open to suggestions. Again, anything but American movies right now.
Yeah, fuck them.
I think it's an action adventure next, I guess. So no idea what we're gonna do.
Okay.
Cool. Other than that, I guess we will see you next time.
Yeah. As always, tell your dad.
There's a second where I was like, what is the always bit?
Yeah.
It's always tell your dad.
As always, send me money and tell your dad.
See you next time.
Bye.